So a very warm welcome tonight to our next session, International Sparkling Festival. My name is Gerhild Burkard. I am the organizer of the International Sparkling Festival in Frankfurt in Germany, which didn't take part this year, and because of the pandemic, everyone knows it. So I'm really very happy that in all my sessions now I have very good wineries on live streams, and tonight we are in UK, we are in England. And welcome to my guests. It's Laura Rhys from Gusbourne Estate, and it's Clément Pierlot from Louis Pommery. He's chef de cave, also from the famous Champagner Haus Vranken-Pommery. So he has he is working in both, and he will give us later some introductions or some informations why champagne houses go now to England as well. So today our program is naturally we talk a lot of these two houses, but I think it's very, very rare in Germany to get English sparkling. So we will introduce you a little bit in the history and what happens in England concerning the sparklings. So Laura, you are very firm with the history of English sparklings, and Clément, he can give us some additions. So explain us a little bit what happens in England, and it's not a long time. It's not such a long time they produce sparklings there, and so please, it's up to you now.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Gerhild, and lovely to be here this evening and to join you both. So, yes, you're absolutely right. If we look at England as a sparkling wine producer in the way that we see it today, their history really dates back only about 30 years. The first vines of Chardonnay, Pinot Noir and Meunier that were planted in order to make the style of traditional method sparkling wine that we see today were planted in the late 80s. And I think in a sense we have a 30-year history, but we can also take our history really, really far back as well, as far back as the Romans were producing wines in the UK. In the Domesday Book in 1086, they listed nearly 50 vineyards. Okay. And then winemaking, I think it was, of course, a particularly different style of wine, I'm sure, that was being produced. And then I think the history of winemaking is long, but with massive gaps and massive breaks in it as well. I think the modern wine industry that we see today, we could perhaps date back to the 1950s, let's say, when there were a couple of researchers who started to research different clones or different grapes that can work within the vineyards in the south of England, and came back with grapes, of course, like Bacchus and Ortega and Reichensteiner, grapes that were producing really soft, fruity, light, probably semi-sweet styles of still wine in the 60s, 70s, and then early 80s. And at the time, I think that style really suited what English drinkers enjoyed drinking as well. So yes, I think we only really see the start of the traditional method sparkling movement in the late 80s, early 90s, with, of course, Knightenberg, who planted those first vines. And then in the early 90s, there are other pioneers such as Ridgeview, Bolney, Camel Valley in Cornwall, and we see the industry building from that, really.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so so you tell us that it's about 30 years now, and I have already been in the south of England, but there are other areas as well where there is a production, and behind me there's a cart, and yeah, it's a part of Google Map because we have here Gusbourne. It's near the it's here Gusbourne. It's near the channel, and it's Kent. And on the other side, so if we go here, I just have to go over there, and it's Louis Pommery. and here we have it, and it's Hampshire. So we will talk about these different regions and what happens there. So if we are going now to the grapes and to the grape varieties, you tell us that at the beginning you have other grapes, and it was not Chardonnay, Meunier, and Pinot Noir. So what kind of grapes, and were there at the beginning, and why do you change it?
Some of those original grapes still exist. So I think probably the most famous still white grape variety that, or white grape variety used to produce still wines in the UK is still Bacchus, and joined by Ortega, Reichensteiner, Dornfelder.
These are really German grapes as well. They come from Germany, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, exactly. And they're being joined now by a new wave, I think, of people looking at some really interesting grapes to plant on a very small scale. I know a couple of people who are playing around with still wine grapes like Cabernet Franc, and some other people looking at things like perhaps Riesling and these kind of things. So it's interesting. But yes, but historically it was more those Germanic clones and grapes that we were using, because that's what we could ripen in the climate back in the 60s, 70s and 80s. And as the climate has changed in the last 40 or 50 years, now it's possible to ripen Chardonnay and Meunier and Pinot Noir in ways that it just wasn't 30 or 40 years ago.
Okay, so when we are going, I just have to inform the audience, if you have some questions or whatever, you can ask us in YouTube, but you have to be inscribed in YouTube, so otherwise it's not possible. So if you are inscribed in YouTube, you can ask a question, welcome, and we can answer this, and it will be nice to interact. So when we come now to the winery Gusbourne Estate, because we have our bottles, and I think it's time for an aperitif tonight. And so I say perhaps we just take the bottle, and then during we do a sip, we explain a little bit what happens with Gusbourne, the history, and how do you make your wines, and then later we go to Louis Pommery. So I think it's time to share a bottle.
Perfect.
We start with the rosé, and Laura, she will give us some introduction, and yeah, I think we can say cheers to everyone with our glass, and the first start. You have a start. You have your glass as well.
Yeah, but it's people.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. But we say cheers to everyone. It's time for the aperitif.
So yes, let's start with a glass of rosé, and I think it's a wonderful aperitif to start this evening on a cold and rainy Friday in London. I hope the weather's a little bit nicer where it is with you all. So the rosé is everything that we produce is single vintage. So this is the 2015 rosé that we're talking about this evening. And it's a blend of Pinot Noir, Meunier and Chardonnay, predominantly red grapes. So it's only 14% Chardonnay. The remainder is made up with just over 50% of Pinot Noir, and then just over 30% of Pinot Meunier. And what we're trying to achieve with our rosé is something which is elegant and fruit-driven, with that beautiful freshness which we always find in English sparkling wine, but at the same time with a bit more weight and a bit more complexity there as well. So we have in the vineyards, we have lots of different blocks planted to different clones and on different rootstocks, and we'll harvest those as separately as we can, and generally tend to end up with about 200 different base wines.
Okay.
And from those base wines, so Charlie, the head winemaker, and his assistant and myself will sit down every January, and we'll taste through all those base wines, which is of course a very standard way to do it. And when we start to isolate the base wines for the rosé, we're really looking for that very fruit forward, delicate, elegant style of
Yeah,
wine.
this is very fruity, and I think it's an aperitif, and as well, for some fish, for some light fish dishes or whatever. I think it's this is very nice as well. It's the fruity taste, red fruits, and very well done. So you have a rosé as well, Clément. You will start it later, but actually, I don't know, because you are at the beginning. We will talk about the history later, but you will have a rosé as well in Louis Pommery's estate.
We think about it. We don't have one yet because, as you know, our history in the UK is very short, and we started.
Will explain it later. Yeah.
Okay.
But
so
yeah.
Yeah, we didn't want to make a rosé without our own vineyard, so we had to wait for our own vineyard. We have planted nice Pinot Noir, also Pinot Précoce, to make our red wine for the future and to make rosé wines.
And Laura, perhaps you can explain us a little bit about history of Gusbourne, and you explained the wines that you make single vineyard wines, and what is the history of Gusbourne?
We planted our first vines in 2004 in Gusbourne Estate, which is of course where you can see just behind your head there.
It's here.
Shoulder. Yes, thank you, thank you. And in fact, Andrew Weber, our founder, discovered the area, and it was farmland, in fact, arable land, as much of English vineyards were before. You know, we didn't ever have that history as we were talking about. So we planted our first vines in 2004 and have increased our plantings steadily since then. We now have about 60 hectares planted in Kent, but we also have about 30 hectares in Sussex, which is pretty much a
little bit more south.
Yes, it's pretty much halfway between Louis Pommery and ourselves, but much closer to the
it's
coast.
in between here. Yeah.
Yes, it's probably just the other way, actually, if that's possible, Gerhild, just behind. Yes, exactly.
Behind me. Yeah, it's here. Yeah. Because of the bottles, I cannot easily go.
No, that's okay. But that second vineyard is just close to Goodwood Estate. So again, it's pretty coastal. It's about the same distance away from the coast. And we have a clay soil in Kent, which makes us slightly different from Hampshire. But we planted those first wines in 2004 and have released our first wine in 2010. All sparkling to start with, but we started to make a tiny bit of still as well a few years ago, which is great. But yes, I suppose our vision was always to create world-class sparkling wines, which I think in the early 2000s, it was about making some really exciting wines that would stand up on a world stage as well, you know, at a time when English sparkling wine was still incredibly niche and not really exported very much at all. So
yeah, so if we talk about English sparkling, so the Hektar is very, it's very small. So we have about 3,500 hectares in total. So it's a really rare sparkling wine we can take, because Champagne has 33,000 and about 30, and Germany has 100,000 in total hectares. So we are talking still about a niche, I think, if we see the hectares. And Gusbourne, it was they started with family and family estate, and they came from the wine industry.
No, Andrew, our founder, was an orthopedic surgeon, in fact, and he grew up in South Africa. He was involved in the wine industry in South Africa a long time before he moved to the UK. Then he moved to Yorkshire in the north of England and was working as a surgeon. His daughter was living in Appledore, which is the village where we're based in Kent. So that's how he found the land And at the time, I think he was very excited about the potential for English sparkling wine and what could be produced. And then I think finding this land was something really special for him. So yes, he planted that, I think, on his retirement. It was a fun retirement project for him, and has grown wonderfully. But I think what's interesting is, I suppose because he was a surgeon, there's I think a precision to what he laid as foundations for Gusbourne, and we're very proud to carry those through as well.
Okay, so if we have a look now to Louis Pommery, because you are originally a champagne house. And
yes, we are still a champagne house.
Yeah, you're still, but you changed a little bit the view. So you spread your fingers out and you go now to England, like other champagne houses as well. So what is when do you start, and what is your ambience and the difference to these countries?
The project started in 2015. Where there are two projects crossing, because there is a Louis Pommery project, which is an international project. The idea was to make a sparkling wine in different countries. So we have tried in different countries. So the first one was Belgium actually, but it didn't happen, and after we did California and then England. So at this time we have two sparkling wine outside the Champagne region, so outside France, because we have also sparkling wine in the south of France. So in California and in England. So Louis Pommery project was a way to pay homage to the founder of Pommery, Louis Pommery. So I think everybody knows the widow Pommery, Jeanne-Alexandrine Pommery, because she's the woman who made the brand. But the founder of the company is Mr. Pommery. He died 2 years after, so nobody knows him. So I think it was a kind of way to pay homage to Louis Pommery. We were looking to England since a long time. We were very curious about this new industry, and we knew that the subsoil was very close to what we can find in Champagne. So this famous chalky terroir we have in Dover, it's the same chalk. So we were curious, and we knew with the global warming that one day they will be able to ripe, as Laura said, to ripe our grape varieties. So in 2015, it was a good time to start a new adventure. And as you know, we own a lot of vineyards in France. One of the biggest vineyards in Europe. We have more than 2,000 hectares in Camargue, in Provence, or also more than 200 hectares in Champagne. So we don't believe in wines without owning the vineyard. So in the UK, the first step was to find the good land. So we of course found a partnership with our local winery to make our first wines. But the first thing we were looking at, it's finding the good place to make our own vineyard. So we really fall in love with Hampshire. I don't know why, but when we were traveling and crossing the country, Mr. Rokin and we saw the land in the Hampshire. It's very different from the Kent region, I think. You know, there are a lot of inside valleys. It's more maybe more slopes. I don't know how to describe, but it's slightly different from the Kent. And yes, we really love the region, so it was evident that it was a good place to establish a vineyard. And we found a very nice hill on a place called Inglestone Estate, and we bought the land in 2016, so the same time, and we started to plant in 2017, for 2018, 2019. So now we have 30 hectares planted on Pinglestone Estate, and we bought last year another land in a little village called Ovington. It's very close to Pinglestone. Yes, the idea is to make wine from Hampshire, because we think, yes, there is a style for English sparkling wine, but there's also a very particular style for Hampshire sparkling wine.
Perhaps you can explain a little bit the difference, Laura, between it's not, you already said it's more clay in Kent and not so chalky, because everyone, I think it's international, everyone thinks it's the same situation like in Champagne, but it's not like this. You have not only chalk and so in limestone, so it's different, I think, the soils in England. So what happens with your wine, with the clay? What is your impression of the wine and to Louis Pommery?
So I think there's probably a few differences. Certainly the soil would be different in Kent. We have clay over sand, and then because we're coastal, in fact, I don't know if you can see in the map behind you, there's like a point of the land coming out by Gusbourne.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So that used to be a straight line. That used to be underwater. And in fact,
like this.
Exactly like that. And Appledore, maybe a bit differently, because Appledore used to be a coastal town, a coastal village. And so we're very, very affected by, I think there's some marine deposits within the soil as well. So it's clay over sand with some kind of seashell elements as well further underneath. The land was reclaimed, or the water was drained about 300 years ago. So certainly the soils are very different. Clay for us, of course, it can be quite water retentive, but Kent is the driest part of the UK, really. Okay. So it has less impact. But clay also, as we know, is quite heat retentive. So it results in, I suppose, perhaps slightly warmer temperatures within the vineyard. Perhaps we harvest at slightly different times, I suppose, depending on the vintage as well. We decided to plant a lot of Burgundy clones in the vineyards, as well as Champagne clones. And for us, we tend to get slightly lower yields from those vines. Okay. So I think in terms of the grapes that the clay produces, they tend to be quite intense. They can be quite ripe in some years as well. What's interesting is the land in Sussex. We're just starting to get our first grapes in large quantities through in the last 3 years or so, I would think. So now to start to see the fruit that's coming through from Sussex, which is more flinty and loamy soils. Okay. You start to see the differences definitely between those two soils. And Sussex fruit has more freshness and more kind of more of a linear character to it sometimes.
Not so full-bodied or
exactly. Okay. And so I suppose as well, Clément, I don't know about the altitude for you. Certainly for our vineyards in Kent, the highest is about 40 meters above sea level. So we're very, very, very low altitude.
Yeah.
There are higher altitude, I think, in Hampshire, but one of our key decisions for finding the good place in Hampshire was to find the lower altitude. So we are between 75 meters and 95 meters.
No, it's a little bit higher. Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, it's a balance between the ripeness and the risk of frost, because I think there are more frost there is more frost in Hampshire than in Kent. I don't know. I think because there are a lot of valleys and so it's more risky regarding frost in Hampshire.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think so. And I think because we're quite close to the coast, I think it probably changes the temperatures that we get. And we do get frost sometimes, but I think it's less severe, certainly, than Hampshire, perhaps.
Okay.
Yeah, because of those valleys, as you say.
So if we are talking about weather conditions, that means how many sunshine hours about, and do you know it's about, or it's so it's the same like in France or in Germany, that we get heated conditions and not so much rain. It's becoming more and more dry.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
The last 3 years were amazing because we have planted our vineyards the last 3 years, and we have even to water the vines. It's
Yeah.
It's crazy to water vines in the UK. So yeah.
So we're talking now about Louis Pommery, and I think we have to take our bottle from you, and you explain a little bit what are you doing, which grape varieties, because it's not a vintage.
No, it's not vintage. Just to finish on the Gusbourne Estate, it's of course mainly it's mainly chalky terroir. We choose the site for the chalk, but you know, in Hampshire, I don't know why, but it's like this. All the top of the hills are clay, so we have I think 70% of the vineyard on chalk, but we have 20 to 30% of the vineyard on clay. So we will also play on the two terroirs. So it's so this
and
one
which
is
grape varieties? Which grape? Yeah.
Yes, it's a blend of the three varieties. It's mainly Chardonnay, So it's 55% of Chardonnay, around 30% of Pinot Noir, and 35% of Pinot Noir, and 10% of Meunier. The grapes are coming mainly from Hampshire because, of course, it's a 16 base, so it's one of our first blend. The idea was to different from the other project of Champagner Haus you have in Kent. Our idea with the Louis Pommery project was to purchase grapes from wine growers very quickly, to know how are the base wines, how to blend the English base wines, because we knew that our vineyard will come into production 3 or 4 years after. So we wanted to have these 3 or 4 years to learn about English terroir. So it's mainly from Hampshire, and the idea is to purchase only grapes from Hampshire very shortly, and to go on our own vineyards in 21 or 22. So yes, it's sorry. So the idea is both to express the potential of the terroir in Hampshire and to sign the wines with our own style. So the style of Pommery is to look after the finesse of the wine above all. So that's why we work on Chardonnay also, and the particularity of the English sparkling wine is there are most of the time a bit of acidity. So you have to manage the acidity, and I would say maybe to tame the acidity. So we really work on the blend, and we really work on the reserve wines too. But maybe the champagne touch, but we work from the beginning. We try to create a reserve wine collection, and to try to make our wine as round as possible, and to make the finish as I would say a gourmand finish at the end.
It's very creamy, and it's very nice to drink, and I think it's a very good aperitif as well. So
yes, it's really a wine for aperitif. It's really make for this. Yes.
Yeah. So it's really fun, and I think it's you can have something. I think so, perhaps some cheese, some light cheese with it, or some fresh Comté or something like this.
Yeah, or from some tapas, you can try some Spanish food too. It's very nice. So on the nose you have white fruits aromas, but I think what also is the signature of Hampshire wines. You have this nice notes of black currants in the wine, and as the creaminess, the roundness is really what we want to do. The process is very simple because we think, like in Champagne, that the quality comes from the vineyard only. So it's really, especially in the UK, the ripeness is very important. So when we can wait for ripeness, we have to wait as much as possible. And I think in 2020 we had the perfect ripeness in the UK. So
okay. If we are talking about the quality and how long is the minimum on the yeast in England, so there are rules as well, not the same like in Champagne or in other areas. So what is the minimum to let them on the yeast? And it's second fermentation. So first, if it's English sparkling, and
Laura, maybe.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so if you want to take the quality English sparkling wine PDO or the English quality sparkling wine PDO, I can never remember which way around it goes. That's the kind of the classic one that everybody, generally speaking, if it's traditional method, follows. So yes, the wines need to be traditional method, second fermentation in bottle. I think it's a minimum of 9 months on the lees. There's 6 permitted varietals, I think. So of course, Pinot Noir, Meunier, Chardonnay. I think Pinot Gris.
Pinot Blanc, and Pinot Précoce.
Exactly. Yes, that's exactly right.
They are allowed as well.
Pinot Précoce is Fru Burgunder in German.
Yeah. So and then there are other, which I'm sure Clément, you know better. There are other sort of rules, perhaps about deacidification or not, and chaptalization and not. But apart from that, I think it's a fairly open book. I think would be a fair thing to say about the English wine industry. And I suppose as a new industry, it's quite exciting that it allows us some flexibility in terms of really being quite innovative in winemaking and perhaps experimental and kind of seeing what works and what doesn't, and not being quite so bound perhaps in terms of quality restrictions. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the future in terms of further restrictions. I'm sure, Clément, I don't know how long you age your wines for typically. Whether you go closer to maybe a vintage champagne model or a non-vintage champagne model, and kind of how you decided to do that.
Well, the idea is for now. The idea is to work more on non-vintage. I know there are a lot of vintages in the UK, but we really believe in the reserve wine. So that's the way we work here in Champagne. So we think with the natural balance of the English wine, it's interesting to play with reserve wines. But of course, when you see 2020, we will probably make a vintage in 2020 because the ripeness was just amazing and the quality of the grapes was amazing. But what is obvious in the UK is that maybe like in the Champagne region 30 years ago, we have a lot of variations in terms of yields, in terms of quality, more than in Champagne, obviously, because the climate is a bit tough. So you have frost, you have maybe sometimes difficulties on flowering. So that's interesting to blend different years to have an average quality. Yes, on the wine.
But the minimum for you to stay in the cellar, so it's not 9 months. This is not your aim. So it's,
we are selling a 16 base. So yes, it's more than 3 years. I think like we do in Champagne, we say 3 years, but it will depend on the vintage, and some vintages are ready after 2 years. Some need 4 years. So I think only the tasting can say how long it has to stay on lees.
Okay. And if we are going now to our next wine. We talk a little about the production in Gusbourne a little bit more. It's still closed because I love this sound to open a bottle, and I think actually we have a lot of days in the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks to open a bottle, and I like it very much. So I love it.
And synchronize.
Once I have to open a bottle during a session, so
I'm sorry, I can't pop.
it doesn't matter, we do it. So we have now a white wine, a white sparkling. So I every time I say wine, because of normally the sparkling producers, they say wine to their sparklings, and but I don't want to get you confused. And so we have now, it's not so easy to see. You see it now? Yeah, Brut Reserve. And it's a 2016 in Auber.
Great. So yes, this is the 2016 vintage. We again a blend. It's about 40% Chardonnay, 23% Pinot Meunier, and then 27% Pinot Noir. So our blends change from year to year, typically on the style of base wines that we get from those different blocks. For the Brut Reserve, we want to have something that's open with quite generous fruit character, that's fresh and elegant. With in this vintage, there's a lot of green apple, but also that riper red apple that you sometimes get from Pinot Noir. There's a stone fruit character, almost like a kind of a peachy nectarine note.
Yes. But I think it seems to be a little bit of also of toast and small brioche notes. And
yes, exactly, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really the hallmark of our Brut Reserve. It's about really expressing the grapes and what we get from the vineyard, essentially. So it is that sort of quite ripe, generous fruit character, but at the same time in the palate there's still that really lovely freshness and length and poise, I think, as well.
It's a line, it's like this, and
exactly.
And it's a very nice acidity. So you want to drink more. It's refresh your mouth.
It's a Friday evening this evening, I think.
Yeah.
And then in terms of aging, again, we follow closely to 3 years as a general guide in terms of lees aging. But we're a bit the same as Clément. We'll taste these wines and we'll release them when they're ready, really. So some years we may find that we want to age them for a bit longer. Again, sometimes a little bit less time as well. The rosé, I didn't mention aging, but we tend to age it for maybe 6 to 9 months less than the Brut Reserve, just to accentuate the fruit character rather than that more autolytic note that we tend to get. And then of course cork aging, which we didn't speak about before, but we like to leave, I mean, in an ideal world, 6 months on the cork, but it's probably closer to 3 or 4 months before we release it after disgorging, of course, to give that cork age as well.
Okay. There is a question on the stream concerning malolactic fermentation, because we are all, I think the audience, not everyone is really firm with all the technical marks. Perhaps Clément, you can explain a little bit what is malolactic fermentation, and do you work with it? And the same with Laura. And
I have a particular view on malolactic fermentation. For me, it's a kind of stabilization of the wine. So you are just transforming one acid into another, the malic acid into the lactic acid, and the malic acid is stronger than the lactic acid. So when you do this transformation with bacteria, you are kind of decreasing acidity. But you're also changing the style of the wine. So but for me, it's the most important thing. You are lactic acid, so you kind of change the style of the wine. Maybe you are going into more creaminess in the wine, And if you are not doing the malolactic fermentation, you have maybe looking for wine with a more
Aligné is more like,
yes,
more straight
straightness.
and, yeah.
Yes. So that's really, for me, it's not a question of, for me.
No, they only want to know whether you do malolactic fermentation.
Yeah, it's not a question of facility, it's more a question of style. So Pommery has been one of a pioneer on the malolactic fermentation in Champagne. We are doing 100% of malolactic fermentation in Champagne. We are doing the same on our English sparkling wine because it's really the style of the house.
And Laura, what are you doing? Different?
Generally, we do malolactic as well. Occasionally, if it's been a particularly warm vintage and there's a particular block which we feel we'd rather not, then we don't. But generally, on the whole, yes, it would all go through malolactic still. And it's the same thing. It's a stylistic thing about just keeping that rounder creaminess as well.
Okay. Concerning the style, or you normally work in stainless steel, so not in wooden vats, or in Louis Pommery and in Gusbourne, as I think as well. Or you have some. You have now. We have only vintages now, but we have other wines as well, other sparklings as well, with reserve wines and perhaps with in wooden vats or.
For Gusbourne?
In vats, there were reserve wines or whatever. You are working with wood.
Yeah. So predominantly we ferment in stainless steel, but we also ferment in barrel, predominantly old, but occasionally new as well. And then the base wines, when we're blending, obviously we're blending them together, and generally speaking, in the Brut Reserve 16 that we have, there's probably between 5 and 7% of barrel aged or barrel fermented.
Barrel fermented.
We've started. We bought a couple of big foudres as well. Because we found sometimes there were particular base wines that actually we did want to set aside and leave for a couple of years before adding them into a blend. So even if these wines are vintage, there may be 1 or 2% of the wines which are kind of technically reserve wines from previous vintages, but they would be in sort of 1 or 2% or 3%, just as a little seasoning, if you like a salt and pepper kind of thing. So for us, we really like we really like what oak brings to the blends, but in smaller doses, and the same thing with aging base wines as well.
Okay. So and in Louis Pommery, it's only stainless steel actually.
Yes, it's also the house style. So we removed barrels in Pommery in the 50s. So we don't have barrels since the 50s. It's really a choice. We also make some trials from time to time, but yes, when you look for maybe the style of the house is a bit reductive. When you work on the finesse, on the fruit, you don't want any oxidation at all. So in barrel you have of course a gentle, nice oxidation, but you have some oxidation, and we don't want that at all. So yes, the stainless steel tanks are preserving the original fruit of the vineyard.
Okay. The really expression. So if we talk about a little bit about sustainability and what happens, because in Germany and in France there's a lot of discussions about sustainability, and I know Pommery is changing as well to organic wines, and what happens in Gusbourne, at Gusbourne Estate, for example, is there a change, or what are you doing concerning this?
So we are part of that first sort of sustainability initiative, which is coming through in the UK at the moment, which is very exciting. And Clément, I'm sure you're aware of that as well. In terms of our vineyards, we're not designated as organic or biodynamic. In terms of our practices, we work sustainably in the sense that we use the bare minimum of products, and we manage to reduce, in fact, every year the amount that we're using. And we work, and John, our vineyard manager, is I think he's very passionate about sustainability within the vineyards in the sense of creating a sustainable, long-lived ecosystem as well as a vineyard, if that makes sense. So, you know, we work a lot with I guess wildflower meadows and cover crops and ways to increase the biodiversity, I suppose, within the vineyard, and at the same time, I suppose, minimize the impact that we have. The same thing applies with our winemaking. We use minimal intervention, in a sense, for a sparkling wine, because sparkling wines traditionally produced are traditionally a very high intervention way of producing a wine, you know, in terms of how you do that. We're looking at each stage and making it as sustainable as we can, right down to our gift boxes so that they're fully recyclable and all those kind of things, trying to kind of minimize the impact, I suppose.
Okay. And Clément?
So yeah, as you know, the Vranken-Pommery group is really committed to environment, and Mr. Vranken is one of the pioneers in organic production, because we are since 2010 we are certified in the south of France. So we are going into organic production in Champagne. So the Louis Pommery project from the beginning had to be as eco-friendly, as organic as possible. But as you know, the climate is a bit more difficult than elsewhere.
The climate is coming, the sun is coming north and north.
The sun is coming. So we're trying to do our best, and especially because where Pingelstone Estate is, it's really a nice village, and with so much wildlife and a very nice river, very nice valley. So we know that the inhabitants of the, everybody is looking at us to be as eco-friendly as possible. So from the beginning, we don't use herbicides at all. So we are managing the weeds only with plowing and grass. That's the first step, and it's very difficult in the UK. As you know, there is some rain, so it's very difficult to manage the weeds without herbicides. So that's really a challenge. Regarding pesticides, we are also as organic as possible, and that's really what we want to do. And as Laura said, we entered the program Sustainable Wines of Great Britain. Yes. As Gusbourne Estate. So the goal is to be certified this year beginning of 2021, because with the COVID, it's a bit difficult this year to launch this new label. But I think there are 30 members in the UK. Gusbourne is, I think, is a founder member, and we've just entered in October. So. Yes, I think we'll be ready in January or February for this level. So I think it's a very ambitious program for the UK. I'm very happy that a lot of wine growers are going into it. So it's very good for English sparkling wine.
Yeah, I think it's I think in the south of Europe was the same. At the beginning, no one was talking about sustainability, and now it's becoming more and more fashion, and naturally we have to protect the soils. And but you have a small in total a small production, so I think it's easier to do it. But if the climate will change now, if the climate will change, if it's become warmer and warmer, and not so much rain concerning botrytis and whatever, with all these diseases.
I think it's a balance, isn't it, perhaps, between of course, climate change, but also, as you say, I think it's wonderful to use organic practices where we can, and I think we're probably quite similar in terms of that, and being as sustainable as possible. But at the same time, I think it is difficult in the climate at the moment, but at the same time, not wishing climate change and not wishing to have the rise in temperature. It's hard, isn't it?
Yeah.
And of course, comes with that, with what comes with climate change is, as well as I'm sure Clément, you see in Hampshire, is this instability and unpredictability within the weather patterns as well. Just a few years ago in Kent, in March, we had snow in the vineyards, and we were thinking this is crazy and completely not normal. So I think it's a balance, I think, and finding that balance.
Yeah. If we are just looking a little bit about the figures, because I have seen the figures of only from 2018. There is only a production about 13 million bottles, so it's a really very rare. And how many bottles do you produce in total for the sparklings, Laura? You know the about per year? Not
enough.
Okay.
It depends year on year, and our yields are changing year on year as well. So it's a difficult one to quantify, but generally speaking, never quite enough.
Okay. So Clément, you know it because you are very young. You have
I know.
the
question is, will I tell you?
Yeah, well, okay.
The first part of the project before the harvest of our vineyard is around 30,000 bottles a year.
How much?
30,000. 30,000 a year. And after we have 35 hectares, so we will reach maybe 200,000 bottles, depending on the yield. You know, the yields are so different from a year to another in the UK that it's difficult to say to give a production. You have to speak about average production, but there is really a lot of variations in terms of yields.
Mm-hmm. If we are talking, and you already mentioned it a little bit about 2020, this year, the harvest, I think for everyone in the world, a challenge because of COVID. And but if we see the product, so a good year, and what happens this year in the Laura?
Yeah, so yes, it's been a great year actually, and sadly I wasn't able to be around the winery for harvest this year because of COVID and the restrictions in place. It was a pretty closed shop in terms of making sure that everybody was safe and safely able to produce wine as well, because could you imagine the disaster of ending up on a track and trace system and having to self-isolate within the winery for 2 weeks over harvest? Can you imagine that? So anyway, so I didn't see as much. I've been speaking to Charlie a lot. In terms of the grape quality, it was exceptional this year, which is great. The season itself started off really nicely in the spring, really good flowering. We had a really nice even flowering, in even fruit set. We did a fair amount of green harvest throughout summer as well, in terms of just maintaining those lower yields. And then, yes, in terms of the quality of the fruit, I think it all came in really well. We had a fair amount of the threat of rain, I think, was quite big during harvest, but actually didn't affect a huge amount. There were 1 or 2 days where I think it affected, but apart from that, in terms of harvest, it was good. I went down afterwards and tasted the base wines, and actually it's really exciting. It's really interesting to see between Chardonnay and Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier, between all of our sites this year, there's actually quite a lot of variation in terms of the different styles that we're picking up. So I think in terms of the blending process, it's going to be very interesting this year. But yes, it's looking, fingers crossed, positive.
Okay.
Good. It's hard to say.
Clément, what happens in your winery?
Yeah, it was really fantastic because for us, you know, it was our first harvest in Pinglestone, so can you imagine to make the first harvest of a vineyard you have created? So 3 years ago it was only barley, and now it's one of the best vineyards in the UK. We are really, even if we have one of the nicest vineyard in Champagne or in south of France, we are very proud of our estate in the UK, because when you start from scratch and you have just to find to think everything, it's a nice experience. So the harvest was incredible. For us, we had a lot of frost damages in April, so the yields were very low. So that explains also that the ripeness was very good. We harvested in September, which is very early for the UK. The ripeness was perfect because we didn't have to chapterize at all. So I think the average degrees around 11. So it's incredible for the UK. Acidity is good, but maybe rounder than usual. I think some winemakers in the UK have blocked the malolactic fermentation this year because of this low acidity. I didn't block the malolactic. Okay. Yeah, we did the blend last week. No, last Monday. I think it will be great. So the blend of Pommery Pommery, of course, but the first blend of the Bosonderheiten Estate single vineyard. So yes, we are quite proud of this production.
Okay. Great. So one word, because some people bought a third bottle of Gusbourne, and only 2 or 3 sentences to the Blanc de Blanc for those who have bought this bottle. It's the Blanc de Blanc 2015, I think. Yeah. So what is it? Blanc de Blanc, only Chardonnay.
Exactly. Yes, exactly it. The Blanc de Blanc is really our best expression of Chardonnay from the vineyards. So when we do our base wine tastings every January, we isolate the base wines, which for us have that beautiful elegance and complexity in a sense, but at the same time, a precision and an ageability and a length as well. Okay. So for us, in terms of our Blanc de Blanc, we're looking to achieve a wine which is elegant, complex, and really shows, even in Kent and in these clay soils, a Chardonnay can sometimes pick up this really lovely salinity and minerality as well. Mm-hmm. And it's that we're trying to capture in the Blanc de Blanc. So 2015 as a vintage was a slightly more moderate vintage in a sense. In the growing season was slightly longer. The wines developed more of this phenolic ripeness, more flavor development, but at the same time they held their acidity. So the Blanc de Blanc 15 for me still feels quite young in a sense. I think it's got a long way to go still. There's a lot of that really kind of citrusy, mineral, green apple character. It's now starting to develop more tertiary, brioche, tarte tatin, kind of roasted nuts as well. Mm-hmm. But I have some in my cellar for a few more years at least as well. I like it now. I like it with that lovely freshness and the youth. But I think it'll also be.
Put it in the cellar and you can wait.
Exactly. Yes. Buy a couple of bottles and put a couple in the cellar.
Okay. So if we will nearly at the end of our session, if we are looking to the future of English sparklings, Clément, it was a good investment for you?
Before Brexit, yes. Yes. No, it's not. It's really not a question of investment. We didn't. Yeah. The project was not about this. It's really a passion of a man, of men, because me too, but of man, of Mr. Vranken, and it's, you know, vineyard and winemaking. It's only passion of men. Of course, it's business, but if you do that for business, I think the risk is more important, because it's the passion at the end that gives the great wine, and that gives the sales too. Because now the challenge for English sparkling wine is, of course, the sales, because it's a new vineyard with a lot of people entering this industry. There are serious players like Gusbourne, I think, like us, or there are also big players, but there are a lot of new wine growers and a lot of plantings. So the challenge for the global industry, for the wine GBs, is to organize everything to assure the global quality and the global sales of the region, because it's a thing to plant vineyards, but you have to, of course, we have a business plan. We know where we are going because we know the wine industry, but I think a lot of people are planting vineyard in the UK because it's very interesting, but you have to think also that it's a sparkling wine. There are a lot of bottles to stock, and you have to think on the sales too. So that's the new challenge, the sales, because at this time it's 90%, I think, of sales in the UK, 10% on the export. So I think there is a good opportunity also for exporting the wine all over the world, but it's another job. So that's a challenge, I think, for the future.
And Laura, for the future of Gusbourne, do you see a good future, and the quality is becoming better and better?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see how our wines are developing as the vines start to age and you start to understand perhaps a little bit more about the vineyards as well. I think in terms of the future for English sparkling wines, I agree. I think it's going to be very interesting in the next few years to see how the style of English sparkling wine develops as well. And what I thought was lovely is when Clément and I were perhaps describing our two wines and the style of winemaking, and to see the differences between the styles that they're aiming for. And this is just two producers throughout the country. And I think what's really exciting about England is the fact that we are such a young industry.
Yeah.
And 5 or 10 years ago, it was a completely different industry to the one we have now. And in another 10 years, it'll be a completely different industry as well. And what's lovely is I feel like we're at the start of this maturity and evolution of the industry, where people are starting to have the confidence to, not starting to have the confidence, but I think people are starting to realize that there are different climates, different particular vineyard sites, different ways of producing English sparkling wine, which start to build a very complete wine industry in the UK as well. And I think perhaps I'm quite personal about it because as a kid I grew up in the 80s, and we used to take our summer holidays in the south of France, and we would drive to Dover and jump on a ferry, and of course you would see vineyards in France, but you would never see vineyards in England. And so now it's really amazing to see how the industry is developing and where it can go as well, and the potential, I think, in terms of quality and an evolution of different styles as well.
So I think, Laura, you are really a very good ambassador for English sparkling. Yeah, it seems to be that you lost your heart in these sparklings, and you really jump in. And for Pommery, it's an adventure, it's an investment, but nevertheless you do it, and it's interesting as well. And I want to say now some last words, because I was really proud that we come together, because it was 5 years ago I was in England, and I traveled around, and I was so astonished where the wineries were, and it was so lovely, and people were really, it was an adventure for some people, and to become a winemaker, to buy vineyards, to plant vineyards. And I think it will be, the English sparklings will have a very good future. So you have to try it, and you have to buy it in Germany, because it's very rare, 10% in total for the export of the whole world. The other stays in England. So, but it's worth to taste it. And I want to say thank you to both of you, and Yeah.
Thank you too.
And we say goodbye to everyone who is in front of our screen, and have nice Christmas, and hopefully we will have a very good year in 2021. And thank you very much. Some words to you. You want to say something, to say goodbye, or Laura?
Yeah, I just would like to say thank you so much, and Gerhild, thank you for the kind invitation to join this evening. And Clément, it was an absolute pleasure to chat with you about English sparkling wine, and I hope to do so again. And I sincerely hope to be able to meet perhaps those of you who are viewing at the winery, of course, one day. Yeah. You would be most welcome to visit at any point. So please do.
That would be a pleasure to meet you at the winery. For us, you can visit our vineyard. The winery is only on the drawing now, but it will grow from us very shortly. It was a pleasure for me too to speak about English sparkling wine and to share with you, Gerhild and Laura. And for us, it's the beginning of an adventure, but it's we are very enthusiastic about this adventure. So yes, I think there is a nice future for English sparkling wine. It has been a very nice talk with you both.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a nice evening, nice day, and bye-bye. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye.